mom on Sunday. So as soon as we decided, or I guess as soon as I decided to do the C-section, things kicked into like super high gear. So another RNCA came in and gave me a different numbing agent. The epidural numbed me from my belly button down. Whatever this numbing agent was supposed to numb me from like my chest down. I did like it, like I could definitely feel that it was starting to numb me, which is important. So I had asked them, just because I had had the epidural in and I had started feeling things, I asked, what should I be feeling? And like, what should I not be able to do? And they said, okay, you shouldn't be able to wiggle your toes. And I was like, okay. So every once in a while I would wiggle my toes to see if it was working, just because the epidural had kind of stopped working. And generally I was. But I could definitely tell that I was numb. So I was like, okay, maybe it just needs longer to work. Meanwhile, I was really starting to freak out, which Cody can attest to, because I think there's definitely something to be able to have the time to mentally prepare yourself. And even though I was preparing, as soon as you decide to do a C-section, like I said, it kicks into high gear and all of a sudden you're like, okay.
Well, it's like you're doing stuff the whole time. You're not like sitting and thinking about it. It's like they're getting her ready. She's getting all her stuff set up, you know. And I think I had a little bit more time because like they wheel her out first.
Yes.
Do you want to talk? Can we move on to this?
Yeah.
So basically they wheel her out on like, you know, a bed on, well, I guess on her bed, out to the operation room. And I'm just left in there and I have to like put on a bunny suit.
Which my one regret is that we don't have a picture of him in the bunny suit.
Yeah,
but
and it's funny because I'd like for my job I had been having to gown up like a lot, so this was actually like fairly uninvasive gowning compared to what I'd been used to. But it, you know, it was fine. You just have to put on like the hairnet, a little smock, and you know, gloves. I don't even think I had gloves. I think I had little boots on my little covers on my shoes or whatever. So really nothing super crazy. But then I just had to sit there and wait and watch The Cat Whisperer.
Yeah.
Which, honorable mention to The Cat Whisperer, we watched it 7,000 times while we were finding out we were going to have a C-section, basically.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, it's okay, buddy. We're almost done. So anyway, so I get wheeled down to the OR. Because of how numb I am, they actually have to pick me up and put me onto the actual operating table. And let's see, that whole time, so it's about 3:20ish when they like get me in there and everything. I'm still wiggling my toes, but the guy's like talking to me. My anxiety is, I guess I shouldn't say anxiety. I was crazy anxious. I was really like, my mom had 4 C-sections. I knew C-sections were okay. It's still scary. It's a surgery. This is the first surgery I've ever had to have, which was super scary.
And it's after 36 hours of waiting around, you know, so it's not super, I can't imagine it being very fun, you know.
No.
Especially when it's not planned. You know, that was not our intent going in, but at the same time, we also, like, I think it was preferable to waiting around.
Yeah, no,
but it's still scary, you know.
It was scary. So they bring Cody in, and the whole time I'm like, by the time they got him to sit down, I was just asking him, I was like, please talk to me, just distract me, talk to me. I don't want to think about what's going on the other side of the curtain. Just talk to me and distract me. Cause they said during the surgery, I should feel pressure and I should feel, like some tugging. Totally makes sense. So they ask at one point if I can feel something sharp on my belly. And I tell them, no, I can't, because I couldn't. And they were like, okay, I don't even think they said we're gonna get started. I was just having Cody talk to me.
Yeah, and like at that point, literally, it's like, what do you talk about at 3 in the morning when you're super exhausted? And there's really not a lot to talk about other than the fact she's having a C-section. So it was like, oh, they got a radio station playing.
Yeah, and talk about the Cat Whisperer.
Yeah, we talked about the Cat Whisperer a lot because that's all we've been watching for like several hours to that point.
Yeah, so at one point I start feeling I start feeling the pressure. But there's like a little bit of pain to it. And I start saying this out loud, like, I feel pressure. I'm feeling that. And I think at one point I heard someone say you shouldn't be feeling something.
Well, so basically, and like, I don't know, like, I might have more memory of this.
You probably do.
So, like, while she was sitting there, they were like asking, like, hey, do you feel this? Do you feel this? She's like, no, I just feel pressure. But you could kind of like see on her face that she was getting more and more uncomfortable. Like, and maybe it wasn't specifically pain, but I guess what's the difference between pain and pressure at some point? Like,
oh no, there's a difference.
Well, I guess what I mean is, like, as pressure becomes more and more and more intense, I guess eventually that's just pain. And that's kind of like, it was like progressing. Like, the further it went along, the more it was like, seemed like it was getting painful just from like looking at her face.
There was definitely a point where I was feeling pain.
Yeah.
And I did say that, and the thing that I remember the strongest from my C-section is I remember saying, I feel that hurts or that's painful. And the nurse who I had been talking with came back, and the anesthesiologist, by the way, is standing right behind my left shoulder, and she looks directly at him and says, she can move her toes. And the next thing I know, the guy is like, okay, we're putting you under. And I just said, okay. And just took a few deep breaths. I had a huge bruise on my arm from where he stuck me. And the next thing I know, I'm completely out. I know from my point of view that I fell asleep at one point, but really I just remember like looking up at the lights and feeling like super dizzy and like I was going down some maze. It was like a crazy drug trip. And the next thing I know is that I look over and I see Cody standing by where the like baby, not the baby basket, but like where they put where they weigh
kind of like
him.
The hospital bassinet thing.
Yeah. So they have him standing over by that,
like
and then
tub.
Yeah, and then blinking, and then he was holding the baby sitting next to me. So those are the two things I remember as I was kind of coming out of my haze. Now this is where I needed Cody. And I'll take him.
Oh yeah, you want to trade?
we'll trade because somebody's getting a little fussy. Hey.
Yeah, someone woke up and probably is now a little bit hungry. But anyways, yeah. So from my perspective, then like I'm sitting there waiting, and this is like before all this happens, right? So I'm sitting and waiting. I get gowned up, and then a lady comes and gets me, and I go in, and like I feel like the picture in my mind for what a C-section was like is like fairly accurate. But in my head, there was like a very large curtain wall. That was gonna keep me from seeing anything, and there really isn't. There was like a curtain.
It's like a little tent.
There was like a little curtain lump, and I think from Mandy's perspective, it was kind of like out at an angle, so she couldn't see over it because she was laying down. But for me, I'm sitting upright, and it's really only like that tall. Like it's not very tall at all. But when you're laying down, you can't really see over that because the angle it's at. So I'm like having to try not to look at what's going on because. Like, I don't get queasy over a lot of stuff, but Lord knows I don't want to see that. So I'm just, like, sitting there talking to her, and yeah, we're, like, talking about cats and just, like, anything to try to distract her, which I probably could have done a better job at. So sorry.
If I have a C-section next time, I'm going to give you, like, a list of topics.
Yeah, well, here's talking points for Cody at 3 in the morning when he really has no idea what to say. So anyways. Yeah, so I could see on her face that she was getting more and more painful as the surgery was progressing. And like, it is a really fast surgery in terms of surgeries, but when you're sitting there watching it happen, it feels like it's taking forever. And like, I'm trying to talk to her, and like the doctor and the people doing the surgery, like this is clearly so like trivial for them, because they're like kind of like joking with each other, like not in a bad way, just because like they do this all the time, and they're like chatting with each other or whatever, as they're doing their work. And so then, yeah, like I can see that she's getting more painful, and then I see her nurse who's across the room looking at her feet, and then she kind of like runs over and is like, hey, she can move her toes. And that's when the anesthesiologist was like, oh, okay, and he like starts getting out a syringe. And I don't know, I think he might have actually given you something in your IV and then also given you a shot in your arm. I'm not 100% sure about that because I kind of was like didn't really know what was
I was
going
also
on.
hooked up to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, right. So he like hits her with this thing, and it's like within a minute, Graham's born. Like, so they were basically at the very end of the surgery when Mandy really started to feel pain. So it's like a minute later, baby comes out, and like they basically just like walk over, they're like, look at your baby, and then they immediately take him away to like this table and start working on him. And it's not like bad scary working on him. It's like when you have a C-section, they sometimes have to do a little bit more, like they have to clean out the lungs more, and they're just checking him to make sure he's okay. So like we could hear him and everything, but they haven't like told me to get up and go over with him. And Mandy at this point is just like pupils dilating and like looking completely insane, like she can't focus on anything. I'm like trying to talk to her and she's just like, you know, just like completely unresponsive. And I'm like kind of freaking out because like I didn't know how out she was gonna be. Like the anesthesiologist didn't really tell me, so I'm like, is this like normal? And he's like, yeah, she's gonna be a little weird for a while. I'm like,
I thought they were gonna like put me to sleep. Like,
yeah, and she like really was kind of, but not fully. So it's even like like it would have been better if she had just like conked out, but she didn't. She was like still like kind of emoting, and her eyes were open, but she just like clearly was not there.
I thought it was gonna be like wisdom teeth, where like you kind of feel a little woozy for a minute and then you're out, and then I would wake up later. But I felt just super hazy, and then kind of went out for a minute and then woke back up and was just trying to like blink consciousness back into me. So the
anesthesiologist is telling me like, no, she's fine. That's just what it does. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then at this point now I'm like looking over at them with Graham because I'm like, should I like go over there and see? But no one's told me to yet, and they seem like they're working on him. And the nighttime nurse just had like a real worried looking face, like, and she was fine.
She was
and everything.
very good at her job.
Yeah, she was good at her job. She just had a scared looking face. Like her normal face looked concerned. So she's like listening to his heart and to his lungs, and she just looks really concerned. And I'm like looking at her like what's going on? Is everything okay? Like they haven't said like, oh, he's doing fine. They just like took him and walked away. And Mandy's next to me just like, yeah, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening with either of these people right now, you know? So I'm sitting there kind of freaking out. And eventually the nurse looks over at me and goes, he's doing fine, and then like keeps going, and I'm like, okay. So I get up eventually, and they're like, hey, you know, come over here and see him. So I get up there and go over there and see him, and you know, he's laying there kind of like making noise and moving around or whatever, and they're still listening to stuff. And I think at that point they kind of like bundle him up, they swaddle him up, you know, and give him to me, and then say, hey, you know, you can go over there and sit with your wife and she can see him. So I go over and sit with Mandy, who's been like excited to have kids for like 3 years. And I'm like, Mandy, look, it's Graham. And she's just like, looks over and is just like blinking like, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'll sit here, look, it's Graham, you know? So I'm like kind of sitting there with him, you know? And then eventually they're like, okay, you know, come back, we want to keep looking at him. So I get back up, I go over there and sit with them, and they start doing more tests with him, and at this point, so he was having some trouble breathing, so he was making these like kind of, they were like grunting noises, I guess, and it was because he wasn't getting a good breath ever, like when he was trying to breathe, and he was also using his muscles too much, like, so when you take like a really deep breath, you can like inflate your lungs using your like muscles in your chest. He was doing that all the time. And they're like, yeah, you really shouldn't be doing that. Like you should be able to breathe easily. So they're like, we don't really know why that's happening. And they're talking about like, oh, do we need to get a NICU nurse up here? And they just like...
Were we still in the OR?
We're still in the OR at this point. And so they like don't really ever decide like, okay, we need to get a NICU nurse down here right away because it's not that urgent. And his breathing's like getting a little bit better, but not really. So eventually I go over and sit with Mandy again, and I'm like kind of talking to her, and she's pretty out of it now, like she's more like consistently just basically asleep. And so they're like sewing her back up, like I can see them, you know, needle and threading some stuff. And she just starts snoring. Like legit is just like laying there like, and I'm like, are you asleep? Like,
knock me out.
She's like having surgery, and it's not like she's like, you know, in like this like passive like just sleep state. It's like, no, she's just snoring there as they're sewing her up, which was kind of like, looking back on it, it's a little bit funny. So
yeah, now it is.
Now it is, you know. So they wheel her out. I stay with Graham. Eventually they take him out and I go with him. So we get back in the room.
They wheel. Did they wheel me or the baby first? I think they
You know
wheeled
what?
me.
No, you're right. They wheeled Graham out first, and then I stayed with you until they moved you to your bed, and then I walked down with you.
Yeah, because they moved him to the room. The nurses were still with him.
Yeah.
And I do remember them because they asked me to cross my arms, and I could.
Yeah. Right. So and that's
that,
when they move you over to your bed.
Yeah. So they had to pick me up, move me back to my bed, wheel me back to our room. So I was definitely like, I was there, but I was not emoting. As Cody told me later, I was very, very calm.
Yeah, she was super chill.
But like I was as soon as I saw him, I was so excited, and in my head I'm like I don't think I even could really talk yet.
You weren't saying much. You were talking a little bit because actually you had to answer a couple of questions later on.
Yeah, but I didn't have the capacity to express, can I do skin to skin? Is he okay?
Yeah.
Like, because I kind of even vaguely remember the grunting. Breathing.
Well, they weren't like really saying that to you so much as they were.
No, but I could hear him.
Yeah.
So this is where it gets really rough timing wise because I was not there. But Graham was born at 3:31. Roughly at 4 o'clock, they had us back home.
Yeah.
And they did eventually let me do skin to skin, which I'm very grateful for. And I just remember talking to him about anything and everything, like anything I could think of at the time. So like,
yeah, we were just kind of like, saying stuff to him.
Yeah, just like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for you to meet your grandma and grandpa, and like just all that stuff. And then they did eventually take him from me because they decided that they were going to take him to the NICU. And this is more that you can fill in.
Yeah.
But the important thing here is that it was a Sunday morning, like early Sunday morning, and they had they were doing maintenance on the computer system. So the nurses couldn't get on the computer system.
Yeah, so like throughout the whole night they've been like trading notes by hand basically because their computer system was down because they were redoing it, which was fine. But basically what happens is, so they wheel us all back down, we're all in the room, Graham's in like an incubator, it's like the baby warmer, and he's still like having trouble breathing and they're trying to figure out why. And so the concern is that he is called LJR, large for gestational, large for gestational age,
I think.
LJA.
Basically, he was born at basically 38 weeks. It was 37 weeks and 6 days. And 8 pounds, 2.5 ounces is a big baby at 38 weeks.
Yeah, it's like, it's not a big baby if he was 40 weeks, but since he was 38 weeks, he was a larger baby. And what they were thinking is, okay, his blood sugar might be low because he's so big, and because of his blood sugar being low, he might be having trouble breathing because he just doesn't have like enough energy basically in his body to let him breathe. As I understood it, I could be totally wrong here. I'm being told stuff by nurses. So at this point, like, they're doing tests on him, trying to figure out what to do. They let Mandy do a little bit of skin to skin, and that's like really brief.
Yeah, it was not that long.
And then they take him back, they're still doing tests, and they're trying to basically order a blood sugar test. And usually they have that all on the computer, they can say like, okay, we've done a blood sugar test, this was the results, all this stuff. But they can't get the test like pulled up from the computer, so they can't like order it and then get it done. So they're like going back and forth and they're arguing with each other, and then at one point, like 2 nurses are like out kind of like in the corner of our room and in the hallway like arguing with each other about like, why hasn't a NICU nurse been here? Like, why isn't he in the NICU yet?
Because usually they do have a NICU nurse if there's a C-section. That's what we had been told in the class, is usually there's a NICU nurse. But I think just because of how everything was going...
I don't know if there's always a NICU nurse in the first season.
Yes, there is. Just to help check the baby.
Right, and I think that it was like he wasn't bad, and like looking back on it, the reason basically was that he wasn't really bad enough that it was for sure that he needed to go to the NICU. He might have balanced out by himself. But eventually they managed to figure out, like, after arguing with each other, they like got the blood test thing, did it, and he was, so like 42 I think was okay, or something like that, and he was at 40, so his blood sugar was low. And they're like, okay, well, we need to get his blood sugar up, and the reason, normally they would have him breastfeed at that point, But there's kind of twofold things there. One, Mandy's all pumped full of drugs and is still like woozy, even though she can talk, so they're like, eh. And then two, he was breathing so fast that they were worried he was going to aspirate the milk instead of like drinking it into his stomach. So at this point, they want to send him to the NICU, but apparently an hour after birth, if you've not been sent to the NICU, a pediatrician has to be involved and say, yes, send him to the NICU. So they're trying to get a hold of a pediatrician, and I'm sitting there like, this is all taking to me a very long time, which realistically, it probably wasn't. But when you're nervous about your baby, and your wife's still kind of out of it, and you're just like sitting there with your baby struggling to breathe, it's like, come on, like just do the test, get him where he needs to be.
It was roughly an hour after he had been born when they
because
by the time they got him to the NICU.
And that was why they had to involve a pediatrician, which is why it even took longer.
Yes.
So like at one point, and this is kind of funny now again looking back on it, like I'm clearly like nervous and like concerned and like trying to like talk to them, and the nurses are kind of like going back and forth just trying to figure out what to do with him. And at one point the nurse that has a really nervous looking face looks at me and goes, "You look nervous." And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And she's like, "Don't worry, if your baby was in mortal danger, he'd already be in the NICU." And I'm like, that's like not the right thing to say.
So we do need to wrap it up a little bit. We have exactly 3 minutes of space left on this card.
Oh shoot, so, man, I'll ramble forever.
You do.
You gotta be careful.
It's okay. So basically, he ends up going to the NICU. Cody is switching between the two of us for about 4 or 5 hours. If he had stayed there longer, they would have had to officially accept him into the NICU. Thankfully, he was only in observation, and they did send him back down. By the time everything, this is again, they tell us something's gonna take 15 minutes. It took another hour before he finally came down, but he came down at 10:30 a.m. on Sunday. I was able to feed him and
do skin to skin,
do more skin to skin,
all that stuff.
And we eventually had family come, and I'll wrap up the hospital talk on my own. But yeah, it was an intense labor and delivery.
For sure that like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
It's okay.
I was gonna say that like that time afterwards when I was like bouncing back and forth between the two rooms sucked, because it's like Mandy just went through all this stuff. She couldn't see him because he was like 2 floors above. But thankfully, like, and I'll say this, like the NICU nurses were incredible. Like they were very calm and very good at explaining to me what was going on. One of the nurses, I know I need to hurry up. One of the nurses there had like a baby in a very similar fashion and was telling me all about it. So she was great. But yeah, so that was kind of my sentence.
And meanwhile, I just got to take a nap. So that was our labor and delivery.
Sorry it was long, but it was long in real life.
Yeah, there was a lot.
And I could talk longer.
Hey guys, so I'm currently editing the end of this vlog, and I realized I didn't really get to wrap up some stuff because we ran out of room on the memory card. But basically, once he was born, let's see, he was out of the NICU. He got out of the NICU about 10:30. We finally had him back in the room. And then around noon or 1, my in-laws, who actually came down, they spent the night at our house, or maybe they didn't, but they came and they stopped by our house, helped take care of some stuff because we literally dropped everything and ran to the hospital. So they came by and they got to see him for about an hour. And then a couple hours later, my brother-in-law and his wife came down, which was very sweet. And then Sunday night, we mostly got the night to ourselves. They every once in a while came in and checked on him. He had a 24-hour checkup. So after 24 hours, they take him and just make sure that he's okay. Run all the tests, take some blood, that type of thing. So you can tell I've been spit up on this morning. Just ignore all that. And then day 2, so that was Monday. Monday we saw a lot of doctors, just a ton of doctors. His pediatrician, or I guess the person who represented the office, where his pediatrician was, and it turned out that was his pediatrician. We saw my doctor, we saw the cardiologist that I had been seeing, we saw the lactation consultant, and just kind of everybody stopped by to make sure that both Graham and I were doing okay. Nothing too crazy. It was mostly a pretty slow day. Monday night was really bad. They warn you about the second night slump. I think that's what it's called, but either way, second night apparently is usually really bad. Baby just cries a ton, and honestly, I think that's probably the worst night we've ever had with him, because he just was crying most of the time, and we couldn't help him. And it happens. But that was Monday night. And we had pretty much, since he was born so early on Sunday morning, we basically had all of Sunday, and we did meet on Sunday with a couple doctors here and there. But everybody said we were doing really good. I was getting up and moving on Sunday night. And so they pretty much said that if we wanted to, we could go home on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. They give C-section 72 hours. To be at the hospital, but we were so done with being in the hospital, because you know, with a normal C-section or a normal birth, you would come in, you usually have the baby like that day, and then you have 72 hours after the baby's born, or 48 if it's a normal birth, and we were there almost an extra 2 days prior to him even coming. So we decided to go home on Tuesday. So once we met with all the doctors, I think we were finally in the car about 2 o'clock or so on Tuesday. But we made it. We got to go home. And that's pretty much it. I have some footage of our first day that'll all go in a separate video. And it was rough. The first day was really rough, mostly because we got home and we just realized we didn't have things really set up in a way that would work. I couldn't really go upstairs, so we ended up living in the living room for a while. And I had to rely a lot on my husband, who was just so tired. But we got through it. We got through it, and here we are at week 6. I'll do a 6-week update too. But everything's going. He's asleep right now and we're doing okay. But yeah, that's the end of all of our hospital stuff. Woo! Thank you guys so much for joining me on this journey. This is where I'm going to stop all the pregnancy stuff. I'm just going to go back to normal vlogs, but obviously there will be little things here and there, like a 6-week update, a 3-month update, and things like that, just to show how we're doing. But you'll get to see him in the normal vlogs now because he's here. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me on this pregnancy journey, and we still would like a number 2 eventually, so join me for the next one when that happens. But for now, you know, you can join me on my journey into being a mom. That's kind of exciting. Bye guys.